one.
As a little girl, her mum and dad were travelling vaudeville stars. The lure of grease paint and applause was her own prompt to hit the road as a comedian and singer. Offstage, she struggled to overcome her husband's suicide and her own addiction to prescription drugs. Today, she's still performing and, in her own words, is still a gypsy. Tonight's talking head is Toni Lamond. Welcome to Talking Heads. It's great to meet you.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Can I call you Lolly Legs?
That was Noel Ferrier called me Lolly Legs Lamond. I was voted the second best pair of legs in television when I was doing In Melbourne Tonight. So I was always throwing in a number where I'd have the black mesh tights on, you see. So Noel Ferrier, when I was doing his show, he'd say, "Oh, here comes Lolly Legs Lamond again." So they all started calling me Lolly Legs, and then it became Lol. And then I started my own record label, Lolly Legs Records, and it's stuck.
From the time you were a girl,
yes,
you've been performing in one way or another, and you still are.
Yes.
But what's the magnetism of it? What keeps you drawing you back?
Well, I went into the family business, which was show business.
Now, you're going to perform for us later, but let's go back to those very early days and see how things happened.
Back where it all began. In 1932, they opened the Sydney Harbour Bridge. 10 days later, I was born. So as I always say, I'm as old as the Sydney Harbour Bridge, but I only need half the maintenance. A lot of water's flowed under that old girl. She's seen some good times and bad times. Not like me, really. My mum and dad, Stella Lamond and Joe Lorman, were stars at the Tivoli when I was born. But because it was the Depression and there was hardly any work, they had to go where the work was. So they were constantly on the road, and I hardly ever saw them. Between the age of 5 and 7, my parents were either on the road with a show or divorcing. So I lived with a nanny in this house across the street here in Campsie, New South Wales. And some of my happiest childhood memories were spent here before I had a real family when my mother married Max Reddy. Melbourne, where the Reddy family lived, was in 1939 a very prosperous city, and Max and Stella fell into a bonanza. They became radio stars. They also did a children's show in the afternoon, Maxie, Connie and Auntie Stella. And Max wrote his own scripts, and I found that my experiences at school were mysteriously appearing in the scripts. So I began to take an interest in the writing, and I think that's stood me in good stead in later years when I began writing my own material. A wonderful bonus of having a new family was Max and Stella had their own baby daughter, my baby sister, and she was named Helen Reddy. I wonder whatever happened to her. My first break came in the theatre when they opened the Plaza Theatre Northcote, and I went in as soubrette. That meant you did everything. You sang, you danced, you worked in the sketches, you helped the magician, you helped the juggler. And, I mean, performing arts schools today don't have the training that I got at the Plaza Northcote. But the golden dream, of course, was the Tivoli at the time, and I got my chance a few years later, and I'd worked with the most brilliant comics and learnt my trade. George Wallace Sr. and Tommy Trinder, the great English comic.
I got starlight, I got sweet dreams,
And it was in the Tommy Trinder show that I met my future husband, Frank. And when the show finished, we formed a double act so that we'd be together.
I got my man who could ask for anything more, who could ask for anything more.
Ah, it was also glam and you might even use the word gay.
Gay was in a different context.
It was gaiety, a gay as in gaiety. Can we go back to Stella and Joe?
Stella and Joe,
Stella
yes.
and Joe on the road. How often would you see them? They'd drop by...
Never, years would go by. That's where I stayed with my... She was called my nurse in those days, but she was a nanny, you know. They'd be in New Zealand. They'd be in Perth. Then they'd get into another show, you know.
So they'd turn up occasionally and your nurse would say,
well,
meet
then
Mummy
the
and
next
Daddy.
thing I know, I don't have a daddy anymore. I've got a stepdaddy. And
This is Max.
This is Max. And you're going to ask me what I felt about that. I can't even remember because I hardly ever saw him. So it wasn't really the wrench, because then I would still see him, even though Max and Stella had got married. I'd still see Joe.
So it was all very amicable, was it?
Oh, yes, all terribly civilised, darling.
Really, in
All
those
terribly
days?
no coward, yes.
So Max Reddy marries Stella, and
Yes.
that in a sense becomes your first real family, doesn't
That
it?
was my first family, yes.
So what did it feel like being a family girl at the age of 7?
Oh, it was wonderful.
And along comes Helen.
Helen Reddy, yes.
Big-
And that was my little baby sister, and I virtually raised her because Max and Stella were really big in radio, and then they were taking variety shows out on the road. It was their bonanza time. So I was being an usherette and taking Helen to dancing school and looking after
Did you
her.
feel like the boss? This kind of the
Oh, what do
substitute
you
mum,
think?
did you?
You know, I was 9.5 years older. I'm the boss of you.
Are you still the boss?
Oh, no, not anymore. Helen has got her own back.
We'll come back to Helen a bit
Yeah.
later. How did you get on the stage then?
Well, I started actually in radio. I got the plum job of singing the English national anthem, which was God Save the King at the time. So I go in after school, and like a dill, I didn't rehearse. So I sing, God save our gracious King, long live our noble King, God save our King. Dried on air. Well, it's a wonder I ever got the chance again. I was about 8 or 9.
The second
and
verse was not nearly as memorable as the first
It
verse.
was dreadful.
So, Toni, along comes Frank.
Who
He
was a
didn't-
dancer in the ballet in the Tommy Trinder show. I was smitten the first time I saw him, this gorgeous, gorgeous dancer. And he didn't look at me, but then I asked him to escort me to a personal appearance I had to do after the show, and he asked me to marry him, which properly confused me, and I said no, and then for the next 2 years he kept asking me to marry him.
Along comes, after your marriage, you
Yes.
have Toni.
Yes.
And you're on the road. You're on the road with Frank. Where does Toni sleep? What did you do about that?
I used to pull out the bottom drawer in the hotel room and make up his bed. Now, years later, I'm telling this story when Toni is a man and we're touring together in a show, and he said, you must never tell that story to them, because this young reporter came along, and I said, and he slept in every bottom drawer in northern Queensland, and he said, you'll never tell that story again, Mum. I said, why? He said, because she thinks you pushed the drawer in again with me in it. No, I hasten to add, no, it was the right size for a little baby.
Well, Toni, it's no surprise that you ended up in the early days of television. Let's take a look at those early days and your relationship with it.
Hello there, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and children.
Television started in 1956, as you know, so I did a show called The Johnny O'Connor Show. And because we didn't have a television set yet, Frank used to put baby Toni in the stroller and go up to the electrical shop and ask the man to please turn to Channel 9 because my wife's on. So he'd stand out there on the pavement. So cute.
One note out loud.
In the beginning, nobody told us what to do. They said, look at that red light over the camera. There was no audience. So I just did the job and thought, well, I don't think there's going to be much television in my future. And around this time, Frank and I got an engagement with Max and Stella's The Follies. We travelled on the famous show train, which had all the side shows, Jimmy Sharman's boxing troupe, the Pygmies, so forth and so on. And it was about the 16th priority, I think. If a cattle truck came along, we had to pull over to a siding. In 1957, we became part of theatrical history because J.C. Williamson's decided to take a chance on Australian leads in a musical. We were supposed to run 3 months. We ran 2.5 years. They took a chance on Aussies, and it paid off. My dream had always been to go overseas, so after Pyjama Game we went to London and we got some wonderful work beside the top stars in English television and theatre. But Frank was unhappy, and after 9 months he wanted to come home again to Australia. Well, I was upset because I thought, well, you know, what's waiting for us back there? Only the chance of a lifetime. We were engaged to do In Melbourne Tonight. It was television that turned things around for me because I had always played straight woman to comics, but they gave me the chance in television to become a comic myself.
Righto, fasten your seatbelt, yous lot, we're taking off. Ding, ding! Oh, sorry.
The infamous tram conductress. In its day, it caused a lot of complaints, unheard of now, but it made my name as a comedian.
I'm flying up to do the Bert Newton show.
Oh, who are you then?
I'm the star.
Oh, you're the star?
Yes.
Well, why don't you rock and roll twinkle?
I was on the road with Oliver, and my marriage was in the process of breaking up. And after we closed in Sydney, I took the overnight train to Melbourne, and the police stopped the train at Goulburn and got on to tell Toni and I that my husband had taken his own life. What a waste.
Do you think that Frank was ever really comfortable with you being a star?
I think Frank thought that once he started to make it as the Graham Kennedy's producer, that I could give it all up and stay home and be a housewife. This was such crossed wires. He didn't realise that, you know, what I wanted it all. I wanted everything, and I didn't see why I couldn't have everything.
So, when he took his life, you had already said to him you wanted the marriage to end.
Yes.
So you inevitably must have felt an overwhelming sense of guilt amongst many other emotions when that happened.
It lasted, I would say, for about 10 years. The dreadful guilt as suicide leaves. And because your life becomes, if only, if only I'd said this, if only I hadn't done that. And of course that way lies madness, which it almost did.
It's hard to imagine, if you haven't gone through this yourself, what this must all feel like crashing in on you. And inevitably...
It was terrible. It was just dreadful, and we were on tour with Oliver. And, you know, we stayed in Melbourne. There was the funeral, and then the next day I went on and opened in Adelaide with Oliver.
At what stage did the doctor say, "I will give you something to calm yourself down"? And...
The night of the funeral, I had a migraine, and then he gave me pethidine, which they didn't know at that time. This was 1966, how quickly pethidine hooked you. They didn't find out till the Vietnam War that within 48 hours you can be hooked on pethidine if you have it like 4-6 times every 4 hours.
So at what stage did you feel like you had you recognised you had a problem with taking drugs
I didn't
that the doctor was giving to you?
I had a problem at all. Everything in the garden was lovely. I was taking every pill I could lay my hand on, and I wasn't feeling my feelings. worse was what was happening, because then I started taking sleeping pills and doing the Judy Garland thing. She was a good role model for me, not only for singing. And it was my friends who did what they now call an intervention and made me book myself into a psych hospital, Larundel. It was a lifesaver.
Toni, quite bravely for then, really, because, 25, 30 years ago, people weren't so upfront about
Not
problems.
at all. I was the first to write about it.
And you went on the Mike Walsh show. You talked about this before the Australian public.
I printed in a women's magazine. The press never ever said so-and-so was a drunk or so-and-so took pills. At that time, we were protected. Not like today, but we were protected. And I wrote the story because for my mental health, I needed to be open for
So telling the story actually was part of your own therapy,
And then Mike gave me the forum to be on the Mike Walsh show, and my life changed. And Australia put its arms around me.
What a lovely thing to say. Yeah, let's go back to Graham Kennedy, because you sang at his funeral a few months ago.
Yes.
So what did you draw from Graham? Because he was a genius, wasn't he?
Absolute genius, because he was made for television. He had a gift for ad-lib, which he'd honed in radio, and he so wanted to be in a musical, but he'd have been bored to snores a week into the run, He really wasn't made for long-run musicals where you had to do the same thing every night.
Now, it's wonderful to see the tram conductor come air hostess, as it turned out, with Bert Newton.
Yes, that's a piece of film that's been lost for centuries.
Well, I'm glad it's turned up.
And I came on, common as muck, saying, and careful sound level, this is going to go up, "Hey, you, the fat Sheila down there with the parcels, get out of the way. What do you think it is, Bush Week?" They were my opening dulcet tones. It changed my life. I went to England a year after that, and I was auditioning for a show. That was when Frank and I went to England. And I'd done everything I knew. And they said, "Do some more." And I said, "I haven't got any more." And the agent said, "Darling, do what you're always telling me about the tram conductors say they have trams in Australia." I said, "Oh, all right." So I hauled off and did that. 3 people fell off their chairs. One of them said, "I've got her on the 39 bus every morning." So it was a universal character.
So the rest is history. Let's...
As they say, the rest is hysteria, yeah.
You've given so much to showbiz. I know you want to also, these days, pass on the kernels of some of those things you've learned.
Yes.
Let's take a look at that.
Fairy tales can come true. It can happen to you if you're young at heart. I'm lucky enough that I'm still keeping busy today. I'm an Aries, and we're the pioneer sign, and you can't keep a good Aries down if you're young at heart. I'm writing another book. This one's a how-to book for the kids coming into the business, because a lot of the kids, their parents can't afford to send them to performing arts schools. So this, I hope, will fill the void. And I'll tell them things that teachers can't tell them. Heart. Family is very important to have. When all else fails, when the world turns its back on you, your family is there. Not many left, unfortunately, so I treasure the ones that I do have left. For you and I have a guardian angel. My son Tony is not only the love of my life, but he and I work together. We write together. Love forever true. I think it's so sad when I see mothers and sons not getting on. I have the most wonderful relationship with my son.
She's achieved so much, and against so many odds. She's a role model for so many people, and an inspiration. So, yes, of course, I'm very, very proud of her.
Slap of your hand, slap of your thigh, hell time, don't you lose time. I personally don't miss the old days of vaudeville and variety. I know people who go to see it do. I loved being in a musical. I'm getting my kicks with my cabaret act, where I try to present a variety show as such, but I'm a one-woman doing it. So I'm dealing with it in that way. Que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. I just go ahead and plan for the future because I'm full of ideas, and that keeps me happy, and that keeps me, I hope, vibrant. And I think to keep the brain working, you've got to, you know, be planning things. The future's not ours to see. There's an old saying, you know, we make plans and God laughs. And I can hear him laughing like heck up there now. Que sera, sera.
Could it ever have been any different for you?
Probably not. Probably not.
You're a fate person, aren't you? You believe in fate.
Oh, yeah. I have found that you can plan and try to control it.
That's when the laughter starts, right?
Yes.
Up above.
Yes, no.
Now, cabaret and recording is still hard at it.
The albums, I'm doing sing-alongs aimed at aged care and retirement facilities, because those people aren't being looked after in radio and television with the music that they've gone into retirement with. It's all, and you can't say it on the air, you know, with the rap and everything. They're not getting. They're sitting staring into space, and I don't want music cut off for the rest of my life.
And you're going to sing for us in a moment too. So before
Yes.
we come to that, staying with the family.
Have we got time? Can't we do an hour of this? There's so much to do, so little time.
I've got to ask you about little sister Helen.
Little sister Helen. Yes.
Helen had a very different life from you. She was
Very
a huge
different.
star, but she gave it all up. You haven't given it all up. She did.
She was in the music business, which is very different to show business. She's been ripped off right and left. You know, she's earned millions and hasn't seen a lot of it, and
So
that's
she got
her story to
disillusioned?
tell, so you've got to get her on to tell. But she has retired, but she is a qualified hypnotherapist. She is giving back by helping people to their fear of flying, to stop smoking. I use her when I have a little procedure happening in the hospital. She comes and holds my hand, and I found that she'd been in about 6 times previously. Bit of a dark horse, that Helen.
Toni, it's been absolutely wonderful having you here.
Thank you. It's been lovely here. I have enjoyed it.
Now, we can't let you go without getting you to sing for us.
Oh, well, if you ask nicely, all right.
Please. Would you do it for us? What are you going to do?
My first recording on my own label, Lollylegs, was called Still a Gypsy, and this is a lovely, pensive number called Lost in the Stars by Kurt Weill. And with the help of my confrere, Mr. Ken Bennett. Thank you. Before Lord God made the sea and the land, he held all the stars in the palm of his hand, and they ran through his fingers like grains of sand, till one little star fell alone. Then the Lord God hunted through the cold night air for the little dark star all alone down there, and he stated and promised he'd take special care so he wouldn't get lost again. Now a man don't mind if his eyes grow dim and the clouds roll over and darken him, just as long as the Lord God's watching over him, keeping track how it all goes on. But I've been searching through the night and the day till my eyes grow weary and my hair turns grey. And sometimes I think maybe God's gone away, forgetting the promise that we heard him say. We're lost out here in the stars, little stars, big stars, blowing through the night. And we're lost out here in the stars, little stars, big stars, blowing through the night. And we're lost out here in the stars.
Next week on Talking Heads, Rod Quantock.
Somebody told me I was a stand-up comic.